Hey, what's up? Silas here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about this documentary I saw on Stonehenge. Mystery of Stonehenge, could be links below to it. Just want to go through a few things that I saw in there and some thoughts that I had with it. The first one was finding out the age of Stonehenge. I mean, it's a constant reminder this is something that we were familiar with back years ago when Stonehenge was still. We were in at least the information that was out there, I used to think there was a lot of more mystery and a lot of I don't know, not conspiracy theories necessarily, but the mystery. People would be like, okay, how were these built? Were these aliens involved in it? And actually, throughout this documentary, there's some things that I'd been thinking about over the years that they actually mentioned. I was like, yeah, okay, cool. I see that this is just in general being spread out in the scientific community and in the world in general. And you also wonder why was it that people thought that back then? These same people who are scientists, experts, found this information, yet they didn't come to these rather simple conclusions that seem to be just commonplace today, and that just changes how to. I mean, that shows how common sense and common knowledge just changes over time. So the first thing was the age of Stonehenge. For some of you may not know, this is a good reminder, was they said the site was dated to be about 3000 BC. And 3000 BC, that's before Christ or before Common Era. They normally go BCE, before Common Era, before Christ when you use it. But when you think about that Christ thing, there's some people who actually think Stonehenge, if it's 3,000 years old, is only about 1,000 years like younger than the age of the world. Like the world started 1,000 years before that. Some people read the Bible and they say that yes, the Christian Bible, they say that if you actually follow the years in there, then the world was created 6,000 years ago. And these people go out there and they vote, and then the people who there voted in make decisions on that. So it just kind of, when I get these reminders that, I'm like, wow, it's crazy that it's rather amazeballs. Amazing that we have the world the way that it is today, when we have so many people with so many different understandings of what time and what things are. So the next one was they were doing tests. They found some bones in this location. These bones are apparently were buried in the smaller stones in Stonehenge. You have the largest stones with like the two large bars, and then they have the bar horizontally on top of it. I mean the rock horizontal on top of it, and they normally it was ostensibly a circle with like these smaller ones inside. So the smaller stones inside, smaller megaliths, are actually called blue stones, and they found out that these stones actually used to be on the outer rim. They used to create a big circle in the outer rim, and below those stones, they found these cremated remains of different bones. So, of different people, not cremated remains of different people. So it's mixed bones and things like that. So they were trying to do tests on these bones, and they were testing the occipital bones, which are these bones in the back of the skulls. And with that, they could tell the different genders of the people who were buried there, because they said males in general have thicker occipital bones than females. And with this, they were saying that the chances of it being some kind of warrior race or some kind of priestly caste of some people who are buried in there were very slim, because historically in humanity, in a sexually dimorphic species, you didn't really find situations where you had mixed gender organizations like this. So thinking possibly aristocracy, because when you have talk about aristocrats now, it's like the king, the queen, their family, their court, and things like that. You could have a situation where that could actually explain why there's actually even children there, why there's older people there, and that kind of also shows another thing. This current time that people are speaking of, with part of the issues that people may be having with gender relations all over. This is not just a developed country thing. It's not just a Western world thing. It's happening here in like Kenya, where I am right now. You have a situation where they say, okay, we have to have 30% of the senators have to be female. They haven't taken it as far yet to the tribal level, because you still have sections where people say there's a lot of tribalism where one tribe has gotten a monopoly on a certain situation. I don't know if they're going to get to the situation where they say, okay, the Kikuyu is 20% of the nation, the Luyas are 15%, the Luos are 15%. So we have to make sure that all the people in our representation is 20% 20% Kikuyu, 15% Luo, 15% Luya. I hope it doesn't get to this point, but who knows with the way some of these things are spreading. But it also just shows that these scientists, they don't care about this whole gender issues, gender spectrum, everything can be changed. No, we understand that with actual science, you can actually look at some bones and you can tell, look, this came from a male skeleton, this came from a female skeleton, and we do understand this is the way things work. And yes, as people are transitioning through it with gender and all that stuff, but just an aside on that. So the next is they found a quarry way they actually pull out those massive blue stones are those blue stones I was talking about, the smaller stones that were first on the exterior circle and then moved to the interior. They found them and they were just, the scientists were showing you just go to the wall and you kind of just brush this off. And there were these massive stones in there. So yes, the stones are already formed that way and they seem to have cracks in it. So you can pull those stones out and you can shape them down. So they might not know exactly how they were shaped down, but at this quarry site, they found actual one stone that was in the process of being prepared. It had already been shaped a bit, but for some reason it was actually left there. But now when they went into the dating of that stone, they found out that this stone was actually not around the time of Stonehenge, but they found out that it was, I think, about 100 years later. It was a couple of decades later, I'm not quite sure, but it wasn't actually dated at the same time as the creation. So they're thinking, okay, this stone wasn't intended for Stonehenge in their opinion, but it could have been. I mean, when you find a site of this value, it had value for Stonehenge, sure, but it also had value for other sites. It had value for other reasons, most likely. You're not going to find that kind of resource and only use it for one thing in most cases. And another thing with finding some of these sites, something like Stonehenge. Okay, so back to talking about how these rocks were found 20 miles away, the ones for the secondary ones for the larger, more massive construction that we have in mind now, the one that when you think of Stonehenge, when you see the pictures, that's what we see. So not only thinking, okay, why did the design change? Why did they start working with the blue stones on a singular circle on the outside, then come to create this more intricate kind of design with the larger ones and the blue stones inside? So this is a change of culture, a change of design, a change of aesthetics. And those were 20 miles away. And just talking about before, how people thought, how did they get these things there? We might not even know where they were quarried, but now we still know, we've found out ways of maybe where those exact rocks came from, how they're quarried using the tools and things that were at the locations. But people wonder, okay, how do they actually get from point A to point B? How do they get 180 miles away, those blue stones? How do they get these multiple ton rocks from there all the way to the site of Stonehenge? But you have to also consider that this is a whole different time. If there's a will, there's a way. And they said this even in there. And I thought about this to begin with, and then they end up saying it. But look, people had a lot of time on their hands. People had different time preferences at that time. They weren't sitting there on social media thinking, okay, I need to keep up with what's going on in the X place. They had the idea where if they needed to get these rocks even 180 miles away, even if it took them moving a mile a day, they would do this. Maybe you'd get to some hill and it'd be rainy or something. You'd be able to slide it down that hill, and then you'd be able to move faster. You'd be able to move maybe 5 miles in that day. But then the next day you got to go up another hill, and then it's going to take you, or you have to go around a hill, and that's going to take you half a day to move a mile. But they would still do this. They could still do this. I mean, they had different time. They would do things in different ways. So if it's simple, just human power, HP, instead of worrying about horsepower, they could do it in that way. Now, they found 2 miles away, they found this village. And they say it's the largest Stonehenge settlement in northwest Europe. Stone Age, not Stonehenge. Largest Stone Age settlement in northwest Europe. Now that's the kind of thing where they were settlements. They probably could have been some bigger settlements. There may be some larger, more intricate settlements in northwest Europe around the Stone Age time that we just haven't found. That's the thing. You have to find these things. They have to be built with materials that are going to stand the test of time to even be found to begin with. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. They found out about history by studying the food that was actually being eaten at this settlement site. And that's another thing. You can't really discuss history without talking about either warfare and or food. So the way they did this was they found the bones of the animals that were actually left there, the fossils or remains, not fossils, would be fossils from that long ago? No. But the remains of bones from back then from animals, and then they could somehow find out that certain animals are in certain areas and the isotopes that they ingest or that's actually in their body, in their bones from those certain areas is a way they can track down where these animals came from. And they found that yes, some people apparently came to this site from as far away as Ireland. And they were thinking like, wow, we thought these were just people in this general region, but then they came from so far away. How did they do this? Why did they do this? And somebody commented how it seemed like a music festival. And I was thinking, okay, imagine a music festival like Tomorrowland, which is this big EDM, electronic music, progressive house type concert and event that goes on in, I think normally in Belgium, somewhere in Europe. It goes on every year. And I'm trying to think how much, if somebody in the future thousands of years from now, 5,000 years from now, found the remains of this site and actually did studies on that, how much would they be able to tell about the general society, the general culture today from studying the remains or the ideas of the location that was happening there? So how much are we really understanding about how these people's day-to-day lives were by actually studying a location where they might not have used on a daily basis? Now, there's also this whole idea of using this idea of, not this idea, of this using this information and saying, yes, this is was done in this kind of benign way. But I'm thinking it could also be a lot more gruesome, a lot more horrific. This could have been a situation where there were wars and there was people were conquering each other, and this was a site where people were actually giving human sacrifices. For all we know, that could be it. They might be actually writing where people are saying, okay, this goes against that, but this could also be a situation where somebody came in and due to their spirituality, due to their belief system, they thought it was actually something honorable to give yourself up, to sacrifice yourself up to their gods, to your spirits, by actually offering human sacrifices, be it their parents, be it children, be it spouses, be it white, women, men, everything. That could have been a situation where that's actually part of the society. They said from what they found there, it was only thought to have existed for about 40 to 45 years. And what they found with Stonehenge was this site was normally populated by people during the winter and summer solstices. And they could tell this by studying how the teeth erupted from the jaws of the pigs that were found there, because they know how the pigs have different cycles. And after it's this old, this tooth will erupt from the jaw, so they can tell if it has this number of teeth. We can think that the pig was about this old, so they can kind of tell something to do with just the raising of pigs and things like that. So definitely, if you want to see more, check out the documentary below. And that's something to do with animal husbandry and stuff, which I think is kind of an interesting term, that the husband is kind of the one who's, I think if animal husbandry was called animal wifery, I think we'd have a lot more people talking about it and saying, okay, why are you comparing this to it? Are you trying to say that like women are like animals that you just rear that way? But it's kind of interesting to think that husbandry is that kind of thing where it's like, oh, we're taming this animal and we're controlling him, and we're kind of deciding what the animal does and how it behaves, and that's the term that's actually called husbandry. But anyway, back to this. So the Beaker people came in, and then they found out that, okay, now this site seems to have changed. Now they seem to be more of these burial mounds, sorry. They seem to be these burial mounds around the area where Stonehenge was, and they weren't cremating the bodies anymore. So why was this change? And they found that this person actually came in from overseas, came from the Germanic areas, from the Germanic tribes, and they came in and they brought those new cultures. And the subsequent, most of the mounds, most of the bodies they found in there, were found to be actually locals. So it turned out that the local people who are born and bred there, that's another thing, born and bred, that's a term of like, yes, these people are actually going there. We are a human animal. When somebody says born and bred on, let's say like some Kobe beef, they say this Kobe beef, I think is just cattle in Japan, and they normally live in Japan, and they're fed off of this, I think, a diet involving beer, and it creates this actual beer. So when you check, it's like, oh, it's born and bred. So when somebody says born and bred, they're not necessarily just like, oh, this is an insulting thing to talk about somebody, but it's just the language and the parlance that we use. So they said most of the people were born and bred in that area, so they adopted these new cultures. And that's another sign of how immigration occurs, is that actual waves of immigration happening in all sorts of places. So how does somebody tell when somebody's actually born and bred in location? What is actually to be of that culture? What is it to actually be of these people, of this place, when that place is constantly changing? Like right now, somebody can be like, yes, I'm British because my culture can be traced back to Britain back 5,000 years ago. But what if you're tracing that culture to to a tribe, or to a location that had their culture end, and have somebody from somewhere else, let's say these Germanic people came in, and then they brought those Germanic traditions and infused the people in that area, and those people in that area adopted it, technically adopting Germanic traditions, and then now that makes the people who live in that area, and now that person who has come from those people as their ancestors, be able to totally say that, yes, I am actually British. Is it just a location thing, or is it a culture and a mental thing? And last, I'm going to finish this, is this the made in China thing. I was thinking about this while tried to fix this newsstand thing that we have here in the house, and I just flipped it over and it's like made in China. And I was thinking, China, China, and then I was thinking how they were using different tests to find out where rocks came from, where these rocks came from. They found out that how the animals came from these different isotopes, how they're studying the way these beakers and things that were actually buried with these beaker people and saying, okay, this looks like stuff that was made in Germany, or they can track things down with these kind of ways. Now I'm wondering, with the made in China stuff, could it get to a point where, if like today, if somebody found a location, found this home, if this home was for some reason just shut as it is, all the things into it and fossilized. I see this car is from Japan, things made in China, this clothes from the United States of America, this computer is from all sorts of different places. So now, there was a time when people could look at an area and say, okay, look, we found this culture has things from this area, so we can tell it was from this area. But how do you tell now when things are from so many different places? Do you need that made in China thing? And now, even that made in China thing, it may have been just assembled in China. That wood may be from Ireland, and that glue on the nails themselves may be brought in from Pakistan, and then these pieces actually put together in China. And then while it's in China, for some reason, it could have been bombarded by some isotopes that are only in this one Chinese area. So somebody in the future could find the remains of that, and then they could now be like, okay, if we find the wood, this is from China. If we find the screws, this is from Pakistan. If we find, what was it? What did I say? No, something else is from this area. So how are people going to kind of deal with that in the future? Or are we at the point where we're writing our stuff down? We're actually writing the information of where these things are from a point where it's like, okay, it's just from Earth, where it's maybe some planet or planetary type thing that will occur. But yeah, that's just a bit of a ramble at the end there. Just different thoughts kind of thinking about that, how it changes what we think about the past, and how advances in technology have kind of taken away some mysteries back then that we had just not even that long ago, but now are things that we understand more about, but then also raises more questions into how we approach the world, how we treat each other, how we look at different things. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Check out the documentary if you guys have, and let me know what you guys think about the documentary. Let me know what you guys think about certain things that you thought were a mystery in the past and now are thinking like, okay, it's not that bad of an issue. And then there's another thing, just a small aside, I'm going to finish off on this, was with YouTube and stuff. What do you guys normally watch on YouTube? I know there's a lot of channels and a lot of areas of YouTube that I watch that are being affected by demonetization and no platforming, their videos being put. Some of the people talking about are fearing that their video is going to be put in standard limited mode where they're not actually showing up. But when you think about YouTube, most of YouTube, I don't think really watches the kind of content that is being talked about in that way. It's unfortunate what's happening to them because I really value the content that some of these people are creating, and I hope more people can see it. But there's a lot of things like these documentaries. There's a lot of things like these channels. There's somebody going over talking about video games and just getting hundreds and thousands of views. I think that's more the bread and butter of YouTube. And that's another thing with the history thing. Where did YouTube start? What kind of content did YouTube start with? And what is it now? What kind of content began Stonehenge? And what is the Stonehenge that we actually see and we think of now? So yeah, that's it for now. Like, share, and subscribe. Links below to this documentary, and also a merchandise store. I'm just posting up different things where you guys can go ahead and buy some merchandise. Help me out in that way. But till next video, just hit my hand on the table. Like, share, and subscribe. Goodbye.